Aloha. Welcome, board members, manager, ladies and gentlemen, to this January 25th, 2021 regular board meeting for the Board of Water Supply. I hope you can all understand me clearly, and I hope you can all hear me. I am the board chair, Brian Andaya, and I'd like to take a moment to take roll call of the board members who are present here via WebEx. When I call your name, please say aye. Vice Chair Kapua Sprout.
Aye.
Board Member Jade Butai.
Aye.
Board Member Ray Soon.
Aye.
Board Member Max Sword. Board Member Max Sword. Board Member Roger Babcock, who's a Chief Engineer Designate, Department of Facility Maintenance, who is an ex officio board member. Mr. Babcock? Okay, I'll also note the presence via Facebook Live, newly appointed board member, Mr. Nalehu Anderson.
Anthony.
Nalehu Anthony, my apologies, whose confirmation hearing is this Wednesday before the Honolulu City Council. So he is present with us to observe. Thank you very much, Mr. Anthony, for taking the time and getting a jump start on your term. All right, board members and those of you who are calling in video conference, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Also in the room with me today is, of course, Manager Ernest Lau, Board Secretary Joy Cruz Ashiu, and Information Specialist Stephen Narstrom. On the telephone are Jeff Lau and Jessica Wong, both from the City and County Corporation Council Department. All right. Pursuant to the 17th Supplementary Proclamation related to COVID-19 issued by Governor Ige, we have the following in effect for this meeting and have been following it since then. We regret that we can't all be present in person. Board members are participating from remote locations. If anyone, member of the public, or anyone who is an interest in the business of the board today had the opportunity and still has the opportunity to testify as follows. First, written testimony was being accepted through today, and those could have been emailed to board, spelled out, at hwbs.org. Again, that's board at hbws.org. Written testimony will be posted to the website at boardofwatersupply.com. Members of the public also had the opportunity to mail written testimony to our address here, physical address here at the Board of Water Supply at 630 South Beretania Street, Honolulu, Hawaii, 96843. Online testimony was accepted at boardofwatersupply.com/testimony. Unfortunately, in-person testimony cannot be accepted due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the need for social distancing. If you still haven't had a chance to testify but would like to do so, you do have the opportunity to call in your testimony during the item that you'd like to testify on. The telephone number is 808-748-6040. Again, that number is 808-748-6040. Callers will be placed in a queue and brought up to testify one at a time. All right, this meeting is also viewable live via live streaming on Facebook Live. Please look up our Facebook, BWS Honolulu /live on Facebook.com. and the BWS website, which is www.boardofwatersupply.com/live. All right, without further ado, I'd like to start today's agenda. We have two items requiring board action. First item is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held on December 14th, 2020. And I should probably take this opportunity to wish everybody a Happy New Year, since it's the first meeting of 2021, which hopefully will be better for everybody than 2020. But welcome and Happy New Year. So I hope all of the board members have had a chance to review the minutes that were circulated. I would like to now entertain a motion to accept the minutes of the meeting held on December 14, 2020.
I will say accept.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. That was moved by member Ray Soon and seconded by member Jade Butai. Okay. All right. Board members, are there any questions, discussion, any additions or amendments to the minutes? Okay. And Mr. Nordstrom, is there anyone present by telephone to testify?
No call.
All right. Last call for any discussion on this item to approve the minutes held on December 14, 2020. Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. All right. Let the record reflect that there were 3 ayes, members Butai, Soon, and Vice Chair Sprout, and there was no audible response to vote against the motion in the form of a nay. All right, so I'm happy to announce that the minutes of the regular meeting held on December 14th are approved. Our next item is the adoption of resolution number 919, 2021. And this is for the acceptance of a gift of tools to the Board of Water Supply from Mr. Derek Kameoka, a recently retired BWS body and fender repairer in support of our automotive operations. Our chair would like to recognize Mr. Kevin Ihu.
Thank you, Board Chair, board members. We're here to ask that you adopt resolution number 919, which is the acceptance of a proposed gift from Derek Kameoka, who is recently retired body and fender repairer. He's spent 15 dedicated years with the Board of Water Supply. The estimated value of the gift is $400, and the gift is a air hammer and chisel set that he so generously wants to donate to the Board of Water Supply. The gift benefits the department by making available a premium tool set for the automotive staff to use as they properly and readily conduct upkeep and servicing of the vehicles. This in turn ensures that those motor vehicles and crucial construction equipment are ready and safe to operate in daily and immediate emergency situations. The donation will also allow the BWS to obtain these assets without additional expenses to involve the repairs. We deeply appreciate the continued support of this board for our departmental personnel and the acquisition of resources that enable the BWS to provide a safe, dependable, and affordable water supply to the people of Hawaii. With that, we respectfully ask the board's adoption of resolution 919. Are there any questions?
Members, any questions?
No.
Okay, if not, I will call for the question to approve resolution number 919, 2021, And again, this is for the acceptance of a generous gift of tools to the board from Mr. Derek Kamioka. All those in favor say aye.
I,
Aye.
Okay. All those opposed say nay. All right.
Chair, I can ask, did somebody make a motion to approve?
Yeah, thank you, Manager Lau. It would certainly help if we had a motion to vote on. So I do apologize. Members, can I entertain a motion, please?
So moved.
second, this is Kapua.
All right, it now has been moved by Member Butai, seconded by Vice Chair Sprout. Let's try this again. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I,
Okay, all those in opposition say nay. All right, hearing no opposition, let the record reflect that we have 3 aye votes. Members Butai, Member Soon, Vice Chair Sprout, and myself as well, and that there was no audible response to a call for a nay a vote. So with that, Mr. Ihu, please convey our appreciation to Mr. Kamioka for his very generous gift to the Board of Water Supply. We really appreciate it, and we certainly miss his service to us.
Thank you, Board Chair.
Okay, we're now going to move on to the items for information. The first item we have is the Board of Water Supply Long Range Financial Plan Update. Chair would like to recognize Mr. Joe Cooper and Mr. Dave Eversole.
Good morning, Board Chair, members of the board. I'm Joe Cooper, and Dave and I will be presenting an overview of our update to the long-range financial plan. Just for your information, this plan will be distributed to the board members in early February, and so that you can have a chance to look at the full plan and review it. And we will be asking the board to adopt the plan at our February meeting. The long-range update, the long-range financial plan provides a framework to support the Board of Water Supply 30-year water master plan. It was developed with intensive input from our stakeholder advisory group and also the board of directors. And it was adopted by the board in February of 2018. Oh, I guess, can I get the slide up, please? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So there we go. I'm sorry, I was a little behind on my slide presentation. But again, this is an update. We're updating the long-range financial plan, which was originally adopted in 2018. Next slide, please. There are 3 reasons to update the financial plan. One, since it is several years old, we wanted to compare our actual conditions with what was planned and to see if there's any variances or changes that we need to make. Also, because we want to evaluate the impact of COVID-19, the global pandemic, and take those analysis and try to implement appropriate adjustments to our plan. And then finally, it is to help us live within our means. I mean, it's this is a time of financial and economic stress for a lot of people, and the Board of Water Supply recognizes that, but wants to assure that we have enough funding to continue to provide safe and affordable water to our community. So this also includes our 5-year rate plan, which we will be reevaluating in next fiscal year. Next slide, please. So this is we've taken a four-step process to update the long-range financial plan. The first step is to revise the baseline, and I'll be walking you through that step. And then Dave Eversole will take over and walk you through the final three steps of comparing some of the scenarios for COVID-19, which we have evaluated. Next slide, please. Actually, next slide, please. In the process of developing the law, this is a comparison of our operating and maintenance expenses on the adopted budget versus the actual. And in adopting our long-range financial plan, we noticed an increasing gap between the adopted budget and the actual expenditures. As you may recall, in response to that, the BWS management has been tightening up our budgeting practices so that our budgets will more closely track with our actual expenditures. And this again is to make sure that our rates are set appropriately and not too high. Next slide, please. Those changes were successful, and you can notice in the following years, FY 18 and 19, that and 20, that the difference between our actual expenditures and our budgets have shrunk some. They're at about 89 to 90% level, which is more appropriate than the levels that were at before. It is important that we operate, have some flexibility and some slack in our budget to handle unexpected emergencies and to hedge against lower than expected revenue. For example, if we have a wet year, water sales can be much lower than anticipated. However, our costs may remain higher. I also can remind the board that any unspent money is carried over to the following year. Next slide, please. This slide we also want to compare, it gets a little busy, the blue outline bars are our long-range, we've added our long-range financial plan budgets and our long-range financial plan expenditures to this slide. Those are the blue and green bars, the hollow blue and green bars in the middle from FY 18 to FY 21. And there is still a gap between our actual and our expenditures, but we have shrunk that amount, and our long-range financial plan budget are tracking pretty closely, at least in FY 18 and 19, to our actual budget, our adopted budget. In FY 20 and in FY 21, they do start to diverge. And so this is one of the issues that we wanted to address in adjusting our baseline to what we've actually observed. And to hopefully to shrink that gap and to take a closer look at what's going on in our operation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. About $33 million on this slide shows, again, in number forms, that we have our adopted budgets across the top for the last 4 years, and we have our actual expenditures, and then we have our long-range financial plan expenditures. And the difference between the actual and the long-range financial plan is shown at the bottom. And there's about $33 million more in operation and maintenance expenses that have been incurred than were anticipated in the long-range financial plan. And if we look kind of closely at FY 18 and 19, we're really pretty close to our long-range financial plan. But as we move further and further into the future, there's of course more uncertainty with how things are going to go, and that difference has grown and started to grow larger in FY20. Of course, we don't know what that will be in FY21, but this does indicate a need to go back and reevaluate our planning process. Next slide, please. We wanted to examine what were the drivers in this increase in FY20, and a lot of these are non-recurring issues. If we look at the top three, we had to replace the RO line for recycled water system. We had an advanced treatment study, and we had the AWEA risk and resiliency assessment that was mandated to assure that we can withstand different threats to our water system. All of those would be a one-time expense that were not anticipated back in 2017 and 2018 when the original plan was developed. We have an increase following that. We have an increase in emergency road repairs. And this is, of course, something we can't predict completely, but is a necessity to keep up. And then we have different consultants on our control system. Moving down to equipment, we did replace some of our heavier equipment for over $1 million. This would be things like, backhoes, heavy trucks. This is not, your normal light-duty vehicles, but this is more of the construction end of things. We also bought 2 mobile generators. This is to help us become more resilient against things like hurricanes and other disasters. We are hoping to get FEMA reimbursement for this. And then also on fixed charges, we had some increases to our retirement system costs. This may be a recurring increase, or it may slow down and be more predictable. And then we had an increase in our electricity costs. Again, this is something that's hard to predict. Actually, electricity costs go up and down quite a bit. But so most of these we consider are kind of one-time charges that have helped that grow the variance to our general long-range financial plan. Next slide, please. Then of course the question comes back to how do we get back on track? And so this shows the yellow bars are original long-range financial plan, and the blue bars are our new baseline. And so we want to bring these bars back on. So you can look down at FY21. There's quite a bit of difference between the blue bar and the yellow bar, and by FY 27, 28, we've more or less caught up and adjusted our actual expenditures to our long-range financial plan. And some of this goes into reducing planned FY21, that's our current year, spending by almost $15 million. That was done as we were doing our budgeting as the COVID pandemic started to hit, and we immediately started to reduce our operating budget across the board, and then we continue to reduce that and take a hard look at our expenditures in the fall of this year. We've also limited increases over the next 4 years to our budget to 1 to 2%, and limited increases in FY26 to 27 to under 3%. So these are some of the changes we're using to realign our operating and maintenance budget with our long-range financial plan. Next slide, please. We did a similar analysis with our capital projects. And again, you can see on the left-hand side, there are some dots. The green dots are our actual encumbered capital project expenditures. And then the blue line represents what we expected what we planned our capital expenditures to be over the next 30 years. And you can see that the green diamond then reflects our projected expenses for FY20. And it's deviated somewhat from our planned expenditures. So this happens to be, the value of our signed contract. This represents the value of the signed contract. And so since FY20 is somewhat higher, we thought we would take a closer look at our capital projects too. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And again, similar to our operating and maintenance analysis, across the top line is our adopted capital budgets for 4 years and the amount that we actually encumbered. And then we have our long-range financial plan model on the third line, and then the differences between the two. And so actually in FY18, we were somewhat under our long-range financial plan, under predicted, but in FY19 and 20, our long-range financial plan over predicted a little bit, not as but we weren't as far off on our capital expenditure prediction as we were on our O&M cost. So in general, this is pretty close to what we might have expected. Next slide, please. But we still wanted to look at exactly what was driving some of those differences. And so, one is first is the Manana Base Yard Secondary Laboratory and Control Center. This is a little over $3 million. And actually, we hope to be able to use CARES funding to help pay for this. And again, this is to give us more resiliency and backup laboratory and control center in case of emergency. We have the Untitled Water System Improvement Project, and we had to accelerate that to avoid other construction conflicts that were expected in FY22, and that amounted to almost $5 million. We have the Kalawahini 180 Reservoir Project, which we had to evaluate and budget for this year. That was the subject that we had to work closely with to get that budgeted appropriately. Actually, we got rid of haiku stairs. I guess we transferred haiku stairs to the city for their management, and that saved us about $100,000 a year. And finally, we had the contract adjustment account, which went up about $2 million. And this is to either minor adjustments on each project to adjust for inflation and minor cost variation. So this is what's driving some of our increased CIP budget in 2020. And next slide, please. Again, we wanted to align just like our O&M budget, we wanted to get back on plan with our long-range financial plan so that we reflect more our expectations in the coming year. And so FY21 was somewhat higher, and FY22 was coming in somewhat lower. And then eventually we get back on track with our actual expenditures in our long-range financial plan and our revised baseline at around FY31. Next slide, please. This slide shows the total CIP adjustment over the next 10 years. And actually the difference is about 2% over this period of time. So on any 1 year, if may look like a large adjustment, but it's really just adjusting the timing of some of these expenditures, and we try to manage that risk by managing issuing bonds and controlling our operating and maintenance costs. These are major changes, and they can allow us to get back on track over a period of time. Next slide, please. And this kind of, again, I think where does money come from as we move forward and adjust some of these year-over-year changes. Again, you may remember we have excess funding of about $16 million on the prior year that combined with the cash, and that we expect to bring in and issuing bonds this year and state revolving fund and utilizing our water service facility charges allows us to provide sources for our capital project and our improvement over the next 10 years. We do expect to issue bonds probably every year during this period of time. And again, that amount can be adjusted somewhat to meet demands of our as our revenue from water sales goes up and down somewhat. Also, the state revolving fund, we've entered actually what we think is the minimum amount that the state revolving fund will be loaning us. They do occasionally loan us more than that. So again, that adds more flexibility to our plan. Again, this comes back to our financial policy of funding our capital improvements with 50% bond, or not more than 50% bond and 50% cash. And over this 10-year period, we achieved that. Next slide, please. So I'll explain this graph a little bit. We have the orange bars, which represent our total revenue, and we have the blue bars, which represent our actual expenditures. And so some years, so they're pretty close. Some years our revenue is a little bit higher, and some years our expenditures are a little bit higher. The blue squares at the top represent our working capital goal of 180 days of working capital, and the blue diamonds across the bottom represent our floor of 60 days minimum of working capital as part of our financial policy. And then the blue bar, or the blue line that stretches between those represents our actual year-end working capital balance. So we're able to fund our CIP project and operating and maintenance costs by and still maintain adequate financial reserves and comply with our financial policies within this goal. And so we can keep our, this means that our 5-year rate plan is robust enough, and our 10-year rate plan or 10-year financial plan gives us the ability to adjust the mix of cash and bond to meet our operating needs. Next slide, please. And with that, we've revised, that is how we revised our baseline to meet some of the changes that occurred over the last 3 years since we had originally adopted the plan. At this point, I will turn the presentation over to Dave Ebersole, who will take you through some of the scenarios that we've used to help plan for the COVID pandemic and what challenges that might throw at us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Chair and members of the board, great to be with you again today. I know Joe went through a lot of numbers in going through that revised baseline. I'd love to say that we're done with the numbers, but after all, this is a financial plan that we're updating, so I do have some more numbers. Next slide, please. As you may recall from the update last meeting, we did provide an overview of the long-range financial plan and the different scenarios that were evaluated in the original plan. Based on the revised baseline that Joe just went through, we evaluated against those same scenarios. Next slide. And the results are the same, that by using the Water Master Plan scorecard and other available metrics, combined with the financial tools that you have and a commitment to following financial policies, that under any of these scenarios, you shouldn't have a situation of where we'd anticipate high rate shock to account for or provide financial adjustment for the board to continue to provide service under any of those scenarios. Next slide. But keep in mind, like we talked about, that didn't include an analysis of a global pandemic. So let's go through the details of that now and talk about what's happened with the board's finances since then and consider some recovery scenarios. Next slide. You've seen this chart before. I think Barry has presented this several times. The blue line is the board's daily water production across the entire island. The red or maroon line is the 30-day moving average, and the green line is the five-year monthly average. So on March 11th, the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic. By the way, this shows production from beginning of March through the end of December. So pretty much the whole pandemic period of 2020. So right after the World Health Organization declared that pandemic and Hawaii shut down its tourism-driven economy, there was a significant drop in water production. And then through the period of April, May, and June, that production steadily climbed back up and even exceeded the five-year monthly average. I think Barry has reported previously, this is largely attributable to warm weather conditions. It's a hot, dry summer. You can see a dip there in July in the daily production. That corresponds with Hurricane Douglas, which provided some much needed moisture, but fortunately no real damage. And then as things have cooled off and it's gotten a little bit wetter in November and December, you can see that things have returned to a little more average. So that's the production. Next slide. Now Barry has also done a great job of explaining how the island water production is really, changes in that are really strongly influenced by changes in weather. So the maroon line is the 30-day moving average of production from the previous slide. And this is looking at the rainfall index for the same period of time, March through December. The red horizontal line that says normal equals 100%, that's what the rainfall index would be if rainfall were average or normal in a given month. If the gray bar is above that, then it was wetter than average. And if it's below that, then it's drier than average. And if you look at the black squiggly line, that shows the, that's, I believe, the 5-month moving average. So you can see that that gets down to about 60%. So, you know, things were pretty dry throughout the summer, much less than average rainfall during that period of time. And that largely explains why your water demands and sales have remained so robust, which is good news on one hand. Next slide. So knowing that overall island-wide water production has stayed up, we wanted to take a more detailed look to understand how changes have happened within individual sectors. Single-family residential, multi-unit residential, and non-residential, right? Because while the sales are staying up, the revenues are staying up, you still wonder what shifts are happening amongst your different types of customers. So this is looking at the 5-year average water sales. These data come from your customer billing database. So 5-year average water sales in the gray line, compared against 2020. This is for single family residential. So you can see in the period of about April through the end of the year, single family residential consumption is staying significantly higher than the 5-year average. Our supposition is that's due to people staying at home more, taking care of their yards, all those types of things more people in the house more often, increased water usage. Next slide. We see exactly a very similar trend for multi-unit residential also. The blue line is 2020 compared against the 5-year average. Again, similar shift upwards since the pandemic. Next slide. Not surprisingly, for non-residential consumption, it shows the opposite. Non-residential consumption is down substantially compared to the 5-year average, as we would expect with the shutting down of the tourism-based economy, restaurants pulling back, hotels pulling back, all these businesses that use water that has an impact, and we see it here in the data. Now, we wanted to take a little bit different view and see how this compares to previous years, because right now we're just looking at 2020 against a 5-year average, but what's the full data set look like if we can go to the next slide? This is a 3D graphic that begins down in January of 2016 on the far left-hand side and goes through December of 2020 on the right-hand side. The green down in front, that low bar, those are your agricultural customers. That's showing the amount of agricultural water use through this 5-year period. The blue is multi-unit residential, and the orange is non-residential. The golden is single-family residential. The biggest change that's noticeable here in the changing trends happens after March of 2020, where the black line is. And you can see that single-family residential consumption is going up significantly, offsetting the drop in non-residential consumption. And you can also see a bit of an uptick in the multi-unit residential. So again, these data are confirming the previous data set. Overall water consumption is about the same, but there's been a shift between your customer segments. Next slide. All right, so if overall sales are staying strong, what's happening with the people who can't pay their bills, right? What percentage of that is perhaps past due or may become uncollectible? This is showing a 4-year history of the percentage of water accounts that are past due. So 2020 is shown in the red bar, and the previous 3 years are shown in the other colors. I do want to note that on average, only about 0.2% of BWS's bills ever become uncollectible in a given annual period, and that's about $460,000 annually, compared to your overall budget of around $230 million. That's not a real high number, and this is a very, very low uncollectible amount that's eventually uncollectible. But at any given point in time, roughly 11 to 11.5% of your accounts might be delinquent, and nothing looks abnormal in looking at the data for 2020. It seems like the total percentage of accounts that are past due are within the range of what was seen in the preceding 3 years. Next slide. So just like we broke it down, trends in consumption down against your customer types, thought we better do the same. And so this is looking at residential customers and the delinquency in terms of numbers of delinquencies now instead of percentage. So at any given point in time, maybe 16,500 of your residential customers might be 30 days or more past due, and the numbers for 2020 seem in line with that, very consistent with previous years. Next slide. It's a different story, though, when we look at the dollars that are associated with that. So after the period of March, you can see that the dollar amounts that are delinquent began climbing and are significantly higher than in the previous years. And actually, by the end of December, the difference between 2020 and 2019 is about $1.9 million. As a percentage, this is roughly about 83% higher than the previous year. Next slide. This is looking at commercial water customers. And so again, the number of accounts that are delinquent averages around 1,200, something like that. And in 2020, after the shutdown, we see that number increases up to about 1,600 for a couple of months before it starts to decline to 14, where it stayed pretty consistent. So about 1,400 customers currently delinquent. Next slide. Looking at the dollar amounts on the next slide, the amount has risen. So while the number of accounts is up a little, the dollar amounts that are past due are up much more than a little, actually as much as 113% above 2019 in September. It's begun to drop since then, and now the difference is about $700,000 higher in 2020 than in 2019. Did want to note that through these periods of delinquent accounts, the board has committed to not shutting off anyone's water account due to delinquency, and I believe that's intended to continue through at least March of 2021. Next slide, please. So when we look at that situation and then think about what to do with that information, how do we put it in context going forward? Really, what those delinquencies represent is a shift in the timing of cash flows. Not that all that money won't ever be collected by the board, but the shift of when it will be collected is important and ties to a range of scenarios that are really fundamentally about the ability to reopen tourism. A lot of this, what you're seeing here is based on work done by UHERO in their annual forecast, the most recent one published in December of 2020. In this, we talk about an optimistic scenario, a moderate one, and a pessimistic one. And let me go through the elements of those, and I think we reviewed this in a previous meeting, so hopefully it looks familiar. Under the optimistic scenario, there would be test-based reopening, much like the Safe Travel program that's in place now. It would be coupled with rapid testing and effective contact tracing. I think we might agree that that's not quite in place at this point in time. There would not be a third wave of infection, and a vaccine would be imminently widely available now. So perhaps that's a little bit more optimistic than where we are today. Maybe the moderate scenario is a little more in line with today, where there is test-based reopening. Still a little question about the rapid testing and effective contact tracing. We'd hope that there would not be a third wave, and perhaps the vaccine is widely available this summer. Under a pessimistic scenario, test-based reopening happens. The contact tracing and rapid testing never comes into play. Unfortunately, there would be a third wave, whether that's through increased infections in other countries or on the mainland, or there's a variant that becomes much more deadly or infectious, and a vaccine isn't widely available until late 2021. Certainly not a scenario any of us hope for, but nonetheless something we should consider. Next slide, please. We put those scenarios to the stakeholder advisory group back in October and provided this feedback, I believe, at the last meeting. Their comments were that there weren't any concerns with those particular scenarios, but as we model them, to pay attention to the nuances. Think about the fact that some of those delinquent funds may never get repaid, and there may be the opportunity to pursue economic relief funding, either for BWS or for your customers, that doesn't exist today. Next slide. Also be aware of unintended consequences. We talked about how more people at home are using more water, and in the instance that they're doing it to grow food because they can't afford groceries, perhaps there's some additional opportunity for education around water conservation to help them control their bills. One of our farmer stakeholder members pointed out that most people tend to overwater their crops, even seasoned farmers. So, next slide, please. And with regard to the potential for additional relief funds, certainly do want to point out that the emergency rental assistance program that was signed at the federal level at the end of last year provides $25 billion to assist households who are unable to pay rent and utilities. This is money that's available to go to the renter household directly, or perhaps even the utility directly. I do want to say that the details of how this is all going to play out are still being worked through, but there was a very constructive discussion at the last stakeholder advisory group meeting at the end of last week about this, with one of the members very much involved in helping work through these details for their DHHL clients, and good conversation between your manager and her about that. So a lot more to come on this, but it's great that there's some additional opportunities for relief here. Next slide, please. So as we apply those three different scenarios to the residential delinquencies, the blue line here is the amount of delinquencies amongst your residential customers in 2020 compared to 2019. So the blue line here, it's, as we saw in the previous slides, it's about $2 million, $1.9 million higher than in 2019. Under the optimistic scenario, we'd expect that to start dropping fairly readily, and hoping that this little downward trend here continues on the blue line into the green. Under the moderate scenario, perhaps it plateaus for a couple of months before it begins a recovery that stabilizes out into the period of first quarter 2022. Unfortunately, under the pessimistic scenario, that could result in a substantial uptick in residential delinquencies. Perhaps state government, local government needs to start doing furloughs in that event. Just becomes a much worse situation, a much more prolonged recovery. Next slide, please. We applied the same type of analysis to commercial customers. So here's the blue line again is delinquencies in commercial customers compared to 2019. Hopefully that was a true peak in September, and it's on this downward trend that under the optimistic scenario would continue throughout 2021. There's the more moderate scenario where it stretches out a bit longer, and the pessimistic scenario that has again an uptick in a much more prolonged recovery. All these time frames being pretty consistent with the UHERO economic forecast. Next slide, please. So one of the stakeholder recommendations was, hey, pay attention to how much of that delinquent money might become uncollectible. So we've taken a look at that under each of these scenarios. So if we take the up top is the residential. If we look at the highest delinquency amount in those curves that I just showed you, and assume, say, 5%, 10%, or 15% became uncollectible ultimately under those different scenarios. By the way, that's compared to your current average, which is about 0.2%, right? So these are pretty high numbers compared to that. You can see the dollar amounts range between $88,000 and about $400,000 for the residential sector. And the commercial numbers, using the same methodologies and analysis, range from about $35,000 to about $170,000. So the delinquency amounts reflect a shift in cash flows. The uncollectible amounts here are a projection of the total dollars that may never be collected. And when we compare these numbers again to your total budget of about $230 million, these aren't huge numbers. They're certainly impactful for your customers, but with regard to the BWS's overall financial condition, they aren't big numbers. Next slide, please. So that brings us to conclusions and recommendations and how to use this information going forward. Next slide. And to just recap all the points that have been made, both in Joe's upfront stuff and what I just went through, as Joe pointed out, the annual budgeting process should continue to be calibrated with the long-range financial plan. The long-range financial plan update that we've been going through has resulted in a revised baseline and reaffirmation of the board's commitment to live within our means. That revised baseline can be accomplished under your current 5-year rate schedule that you adopted a couple years back, and the revenue increases that were anticipated in the long-range financial plan. That's accomplished by shifting the timing of some of your capital projects and also shifting the mix of bond funding and cash funding from year to year. I did want to note that the dollars, there was a table that Joe showed, and it shows the dollars for the water system facilities charge. Once you spend down that current balance, it reverts to about $8 million per year that would be expected to be collected from that. That's not enough money to cover your growth-related capital projects each year. So we would recommend that water system facilities charge update be completed to help with that revenue stream going forward. Next slide, please. Reductions in your non-residential customers' water demands have been offset overall by increases in residential demands with no impact to overall water use. Interestingly, your overall delinquency rate has remained unchanged and within the historical ranges, although the dollar values of those delinquencies are higher, and we talked about those numbers already. Your total delinquencies as of the end of December are about $2.6 million, which is just over 1% of the BWS's annual budget. Next slide. Finally, BWS has worked diligently with customers to establish payment plans, which has, I think, made a big difference in helping to control the amounts of those delinquencies. Working closely with customers, certainly want to acknowledge Jennifer and all the staff in customer care. I think have done a great job, and it really shows in looking at those numbers. These delinquencies have resulted in relatively minor shifts in the timing of cash flows, but the projections of the total dollar amounts that become uncollectible do not seem to result in significant financial impacts. But we certainly note that the pandemic is not over. Things can still change, and it is important to continue to closely monitor the impacts of the pandemic and the financial conditions that result to confirm these conclusions. Lastly, the ultimate availability of stimulus funding remains uncertain, but could certainly have some positive impacts here. Thank you, and certainly welcome any questions.
Members, any questions?
Chair.
Yes, member Butai.
You know, on the bullet point, you said the dollars currently collected from water system facilities charge are used to cover costs for growth-related projects. And then I think Joe had another slide that says CIP adjustment total 2% over 10 years. How much more can the CIP be delayed or postponed if our revenue projection water consumption is not materialized?
I guess I'll take a crack at that. Joe asked for any comments also. And ultimately, the question really comes down to, the changes from year to year in the CIP that Joe showed in that 10-year table were something on the order of 10, 20, 30, $40 million in a given year. But over a 10-year period, they were only about 2%. So there's a lot of flexibility to shift things around in timing of projects from year to year. And if your revenues don't come in like you expect, or the delinquencies go higher, you could obviously make additional adjustments there. The impact of that is that it pushes those projects out into the future. So they still need to be done, but you'd accomplish them later than you otherwise would have.
So if I could add to what David said, changes in the water demand because maybe a slower growth rate in the economy, which translates maybe into a slower growth rate in demand for water, then yeah, the same thing. We can delay some of the source development, some of the CIP capacity projects to future years. So just kind of slide it forward in time. Jade, I hope we answered your question.
No, you did, just, I guess the flexibility to, reduce the expenses.
Yeah, and I think an important point Dave's also made in the presentation is that the last time our water system facilities charge, which is our impact fees to pay for new capacity in the system being used by new customers, capacity in the system being used by new customers, was updated in the 90s. So one of the things I think we would like to maybe consider with the board, maybe as a task this coming year or so, is to look at potentially an update to those water system facilities charge, perhaps on a gradual basis over time, because it's been a while since we visited an update to the water system facilities charges.
Okay, I think with respect to the water systems facilities charge, I know that we did start on it, and I think we did have some discussion. So maybe we can restart that. And did we have a PIG for that, or was it just?
I believe we were using the PIG with a chair and with also a vice chair.
Okay. Maybe we can schedule one within the next month, and we can report back to the board.
Sure.
February.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do. Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions? Thank you, Jade. That was one of my questions I had on my list. Thank you for.
I have a question as well, Brian. Dave, I was wondering if you had a sense, I mean, I realize that in Hawaii our economy is different because it's a tourism base, so we're perhaps hit harder than some of the other places, but do you have a sense of either locally and or nationally how we line up as far as the percentage of accounts that are uncollectible? I mean, this is a global, pandemic, but just wondering if you have any sense. Or if
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. First of all, I'd say that what's normal for Board of Water, having an ultimate uncollectible amount of only 0.2%, is a very favorable number. So that's something, and we've seen that actually. I think in conversations with folks from Hawaiian Electric and others, they've commented that people in Hawaii generally do a phenomenal job of paying their bills, and they take it seriously. And so that's something that I think we see that's a little bit unique compared to the mainland in a great way. In looking at the current delinquencies compared to other utilities and other locations, I'll provide a perspective from California. And what we see is it really varies strongly from utility to utility and the overall socioeconomic makeup of that utility's service area. So those water utilities that are serving more disadvantaged communities are having more substantial problems. Those with a more diverse economy, a more robust spread like Hawaii's, are seeing less of an impact. And I think that's also reflected when we see that the overall amount of percentage of accounts that are delinquent is staying pretty consistent, but the people who are struggling more, right? That's why that dollar volume is going up for them. And that kind of makes sense when you think about what you know about the island and your communities.
I have a question, a swamp program. Maybe this is for Joe.
In the calculations, did you assume continue go forward with the discount program for affordable housing hookups?
Go ahead, Joe.
Yes, for the current rate schedule, which goes through, 2020, June of 2023, that program does continue.
Okay, thanks. I have a comment for Ernie, perhaps, and I was glad to see our new member Roger is on right now.
Welcome,
At some point, it would be really good to sit down with the new mayor's people and talk policy a little bit. I think he's got to get his feet on the ground firmly first. But, for example, the discount program, which I happen to love, that supported an initiative by the last administration. And I guess I'd like to know if the new mayor is going to carry it through. And if he is, then we'll continue to project it. And if he's not, I'm not sure we want to be out there by ourselves. There are a number of other questions that would be great for us to get a feel for where the new mayor wants to move, so that we're consistent. So it's just a request. If you could, at some time when it's appropriate, set that up.
Member Soon, I just want to let you know that the mayor did reach out to me directly, and he suggested, and I'm not rushing it, because he has a lot on his plate right now, and his team is having to do a lot. But he said, at some point we should sit down over coffee and talk story. So that's like a rain check I have with the mayor, and I will be sure to mention this program with him.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, any other questions?
Chair,
Yes, Member Batai.
on the 180 days working capital, at DOT, we usually use cash on hand as our financial metric. How would you convert the working capital to just cash on hand?
I'll let our Waterworks controller answer that question. But I think it's almost like about $18 million a month for working capital. Joe, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, no, it's equivalent to cash on hand. We have different reserve funds that we're subtracting out, but really what we call working capital is essentially cash on hand. We subtract out encumbered funds, which could become available in a dire emergency, but no, it's really the equivalent of that.
Thank you.
And Board Member Batai, the board policy for the working capital is, I think, 60 to 180 days.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? If not,
Chair, can I assume we're going to vote on are we going to vote at the next meeting on something, on adjustments?
So Chair, if I could.
yes, Manjula.
So this is, and I'm open for discussion with the board members, but we had envisioned kind of wrapping up the staff review of the draft of the long-range financial plan, and then in early February, transmitting the draft long-range financial plan to the board members, to each of the board members for your review before the February board meeting. And at the February board meeting, if the members are so inclined to look at the board adopting, or the board could also tell us or ask us to revise certain portions of it. Of course, we would seek comments from board members even before the board meeting, from individual board members, to suggest any comments or have any questions about the draft report, the draft plan. So that's kind of what we had envisioned here. if that works with the board, that'll be great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple here. It's along the same lines as Ray's comments. So one thing I would like to see is focusing on the on this graph. CIP adjustments total 2% over 2 years, over 10 years. I'm sorry, and it lays out every year what the original budget was, and then the revised, and then the difference. And I think it's at 2% over 10 years. I was wondering if there was any detail behind these numbers. For example, I think 2021, was the detail was provided. The difference is 70.2 over the original. And I think there was a list of some projects that were slated. But if in the future years, if there was a little bit more detail like that, we would be able to know a little bit better, what the adjustment will actually look like in real life.
Thank you, Chair. We actually are very close to finalizing a 6-year program with actual projects listed out, and there are various phases of each project. And we can provide, our intent was actually to come before the board, I think possibly in the March timeframe, have the board formally adopt the 6-year plan. We just are going to need to, I think, work a little bit more on the additional 4 years for the full 10-year period, and can present that to the board, I guess separately from the long-range financial plan, but to inform the board what other projects.
Okay, that works. And I mean, we're also, with respect to the water systems facilities charge, hopefully we'll have some better clarity on that in the next month or two, which can then also be used to adjust the long-range financial plan. And my last question is just from a process standpoint. So we previously had a long-range financial plan and basically a long-range model of what the budget should be. But apparently the actual budget was different, was higher than the long-range model. I'm assuming that we discussed that fully during our budget. Is that the budget workshop that we?
Yeah, the budget workshop. I will be sure to highlight the differences in the next coming budget workshop this year. What happens is, and there was a slide that explained, I think, what are some of the drivers that the budget went up. And there were actually some very good reasons for it. But,
sure.
Yeah, it's a good point too. And I think in one of the bullets here, we talk about every year in the budgeting process, go back to the long-range financial plan model and see how we stand against that and how we're tracking with the long-range financial plan.
Yeah. So I guess my point was, we can have this model, and we should have the model, and we should adjust periodically. But I guess we can, depending on the circumstances and the developments that happen, we do have the flexibility on an annual basis to make the appropriate adjustments and, where appropriate.
Yeah, what happens is because the long-range financial plan is really kind of a projection going forward. And I know there's one slide that showed the bars kind of increasing over time. It's a projection. So each year things occur, that new challenges that we have to deal with, and sometimes it will kind of go up and down from that projection. But if we can try to, over time, track very close to the projection, that's the goal here.
Yep.
And I think it's a sign that by having this forward look on our finances, we can be sure that we are trying to avoid a rate shock. We're having to do a massive rate increase to catch up with expenses that we didn't project we would need. In the long-range financial plan, we're trying to do that forward look and projecting out what our future operating expenses might be, and also what our capital program is looking like. So I think it's a valuable tool. And it's something that the board adopts by policy. So since it's the board's policy, our objective is to try to stay consistent with the policy over time.
Yeah, thank you, Manager Lau. That's great to hear. Definitely, I don't know. I don't think anyone wants any surprises with respect to this.
Yeah, the hard thing in life is that sometimes life happens, and like the surprise that everybody, this whole planet experienced last year with the pandemic, was something that I think most of us didn't really think was going to happen so rapidly. And yet we have to be resilient to adapt to it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Can I, this is a really interesting discussion. Can I just add to what the chair is saying, though, Ernie? I think the long-range plan was meant as a projecting tool. It is so that we can align the finances, the billings, the personnel count, etc. But I'm not opposed if things start moving faster, then we, in fact, adjust the long-range plan as opposed to adjusting our short-term year-by-year budgets to match the long-range plan. We may at some point say, hey, wait a second. This was a really long plan written 10, 15 years ago by then. And maybe we need to adjust the long-range plan. So don't be too fixated on bringing us back if, in fact, because of efficiency, because of productivity, you guys are moving faster, and we end up spending more, and we end up laying more pipe, and et cetera. I'm saying it can go in the other direction too. It can adjust the long-range plan.
Thank you, Member Soon. The other things that come into mind too is that it's a plan, it's a guide, it's a projection, a forward look, but sometimes there are bumps in the road that happen. Like right now, the EPA is considering, and they published a final rule for lead and copper, amendments to the lead and copper rule. We may need to come back and re-look at some of our CIP projects to be able to meet that. But point well taken. It's a guide, and if we, and I would be thrilled if we were to become more efficient and deliver more miles of pipeline each year. And you can adjust the plan.
All right. With that, thank you, everybody, on this. If there is nothing further, by the way, Madam Secretary, Mr. Nordstrom, has there been any communication regarding this item or any others on the agenda?
No.
All right. Okay, being that, I'd like to thank Mr. Cooper and Mr. Eversold for their work on this project. Thank you very much for the report and for keeping us up to date with our long-range financial plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next item for information. Item number 2, and it's really appropriate with the rain pouring outside. I'd like to recognize Mr. Barry Usagawa, who's going to give us a status update of groundwater levels at all index stations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members, and I think the bell's over. Anyway, the one aquifer index station was in groundwater, 57, and that's Peru, just barely in caution. The production was 130.8 million gallons per day, the goal for this year, coming year. And most monitoring stations are slightly declining or stable. The rainfall, as Dave's presentation showed, was, we're still in this low rainfall period through December, but I believe January will show quite a bit more rain. Certainly it's been raining on the winter side. Amazingly though, the Hawaii drought monitor is still showing some drought conditions on the river walk. So that was a significant drought we just went through in 2020. As of October would like to scroll through the rest. Otherwise, if there's any questions, you go to kind of keep these scroll down to. So you can see kind of key was one of those that were in low groundwater, just almost was in right up to stage summer, but has recovered above caution. The others, and while Hamilton and our east fishing sources and windward were low, Hurricane and through Pearl Harbor are all remaining very high because of the amount of valuable aquifer water there. You go to Honolulu. And Honolulu, so it's just barely in caution. We'll continue to monitor this, but it has not gone up to critical. And if you go to Waihee is one that actually people drop below critical, but that has since recovered. I think the production is still not quite up to what it used to produce, but it's recovering. It does take a while when it's hit hard like that. So. And then back to the rainfall now. Yeah, so I think in January we'll see the rainfall totals really high, much higher. And then it'll take a couple months for the 500 average to start coming out. That's what we anticipate. And the National Weather Service is still forecasting a wet winter, so I think we're experiencing it now. And that's my report. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
All right, thank you for the report. Any questions, members? Okay, before we move on to the next one, I would like to make sure we thank our customers for helping us out and complying. That I think that would further raise awareness so that when we do need them to voluntarily limit usage, they'll be more apt to comply. So if we could take a look at that. Thank you. All right, the final item today's agenda is the water main repair report for December 2020. Chair recognizes Mr. Mike Fouquet.
This is Mike in Philly. Can you hear me? Because we lost power here in Philly, so I'm not sure if you can hear me.
We can hear you clear, Mike.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, good. That's why I'm in the dark. Got no light up here. Anyway, during the month of December, we had 31 main breaks. The average time it took us to repair the main was approximately 14 hours for the 416 and 12-inch mains. The leak detection team surveyed 16 miles. They found 2 leaks on our mains. For the fiscal year, they have surveyed 81 miles, and they have found 16 leaks on our mains. That's it for the report. Any questions? Glad to answer.
Members, any questions? Okay, hearing none. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Fouquet, for the report and for joining us despite the power outage over there.
It's pouring out here.
Over here too. All right, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Before I adjourn the meeting today, I'd like to remind all of our members, financial disclosures are due this Sunday, January 31st, 2021. We would appreciate your assistance in completing those disclosures and sending them in to the office so that we don't get written up in the paper. So if we'd appreciate your cooperation there. And also I want to take this opportunity to welcome new board member, Roger Babcock, from the Department of Facility Maintenance, and soon to be board member, Naalihu Anthony. Thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to working with you. Okay. If there's
Chair, before you adjourn,
yes.
Can I make a request for the next meeting? Can Ernie give us an update on Red Hill? and particularly on the contested case that's going to be held shortly. There's quite a bit of reporting in the media, and I want to be sure that what's being reported is accurate of the board's policies. But I'd also like to know where we're at and what's going on, both on the administrative side and on the legal side of the issue. So can you please schedule that so we can notice it appropriately? Appreciate it. Thank you.
Be glad to do that, Ray.
Thank you, Ray. We make sure to do that. And in fact, prior to then, all board members should be getting some written updates from our council.
Okay.
All right. If there's no further business, can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Jay?
Here.
Again, it's good one.
Okay, it's been moved by Member Butai and second by Vice Chair Sproul to adjourn the meeting. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us on this wet afternoon.